everyone, and welcome to our latest installment in the SECRES guest lecture series. This in 2021 being the 25th anniversary of the founding of the Colorado Renewable Energy Society. Before I introduce our speaker, I thought a little bit of context would be worthwhile for those that may not be familiar with how a rural electric co-op functions. So let me just say that in the state of Colorado, there are two investor-owned utilities, Xcel and Black Hills Energy, that most people are familiar with. I think most people are also familiar with the 29 municipal utilities in the state, such as Colorado Springs Utilities. In fact, we had Mr. Aram Benjamin, the CEO of Springs Utilities, as one of our guest speakers last year. Finally, there are 22 rural electric co-ops serving 1.25 million people, but also covering 70% of the land area of the state. Rural electric co-ops are member-owned, and they are nonprofit organizations. And also key to understand is that, with small exceptions that we'll be talking about in the main lecture here, the electric co-ops do not generate their own electricity. They primarily purchase from a generation and transmission organization. In the case of most of the co-ops, 17 of the co-ops in Colorado, they purchase their electricity from Tri-State Generation and Transmission. And the rural co-ops then distribute that electricity to their members. Under the contract with Tri-State, which ends in 2050, co-ops are allowed to self-generate 5% of their energy load, and some extra for solar, community solar projects. And also recently, Tri-State has allowed electric co-ops with a fairly substantial payment to go into what's called a partial requirements contract, where a co-op can generate then up to 50% of their energy load. So with that as background, I would like to introduce our very special speaker for tonight. Bryan Hannegan is the president and CEO of Holy Cross Energy in Glenwood Springs. Prior to joining Holy Cross in July of 2017, he was an associate laboratory director at NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, where he co-founded the U.S. Department of Energy's Grid Modernization Initiative. Earlier in his career, Bryan held senior leadership roles at the Electric Power Research Institute and the White House Council on Environmental Quality, and the U.S. Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. So with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Bryan Hannegan for tonight's session. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Well, good evening, everybody. Hello to all of our friends at Southeast CRES. You've got me thinking that we need a Western Slope version. And if you're here from the Denver chapter, hello again. It's great to talk to you all. I appreciate it very much, being able to be with you tonight to tell you a little bit about Holy Cross Energy and our journey to 100% clean energy. As Jim mentioned at the open, Holy Cross is one of the 22 electric cooperatives in the state. We are headquartered in Glenwood Springs. We serve the entire Eagle Vale Valley from just east of Glenwood Springs and the Glenwood Canyon, from the town of Dot Zero all the way east to Vail Pass. We also serve the beautiful Roaring Fork Valley, where I'm sitting talking to you tonight, from just south of Glenwood Springs all the way through down to and including the city of Aspen, except for the immediate area served by their electric utility. And then there's a third portion of our service territory, which is along the I-70 corridor from west of Glenwood almost to Debec on the western slope. We have the south side of the highway. Xcel Energy has the north side of the highway. And so taken all together, those three locations, we serve approximately 46,000 members with clean and reliable power that is the backbone of our society. As you know, electricity is the lifeblood of everything that we do. And as you see here, our mission is really to provide safe, reliable, affordable, and increasingly sustainable energy and services that improve the quality of life for our members and our communities. As far as our utility goes, we're approximately 3% the size of Xcel Energy here in Colorado. So we're on the relatively small side, but we like to say we're small, but innovative and nimble. And that's why our vision is to lead the responsible transition to a clean energy future. When I came aboard as the CEO here in 2017, a little bit more than 39% of our power supply came from wind, solar, biomass, hydroelectric power, as well as one really innovative coal mine methane recovery project to the south of us here in Somerset. That number at year end in 2020 was 44%. There was an additional 3% in renewable energy on our system that was purchased through our voluntary renewable energy purchase program called PURE. So on a system basis, we were up around 47. I just checked the numbers coming in, and this last month, we were more like 57, with new projects coming online every day, including some that I'll talk about here shortly. Our goal, when we first started out with a clean energy goal in 2018, was to get to a 70% clean energy content by 2030. Once we started getting into the details and acquiring projects and working on contracts and building things in our community, we realized that 70% was actually going to be relatively easy. And we set our sights on going the rest of the way in something that we now call our journey to 100%. So Jim, if I can get the next slide, we'll go right into that. So our journey to 100% clean energy is really, it's a central portion of our strategic plan. We have 6 strategic goals in there. The first is around power supply. I should mention that we have a fair amount of flexibility. As Jim mentioned, some cooperatives in the state of Colorado are customers of Tri-State, G&T, where up to 5% of their power can be self-generated, but the rest must be bought from the G&T cooperative, the parent wholesale provider. We are one of 4, soon to be 3, co-ops in the state of Colorado that are actually wholesale customers of Xcel Energy. And we're the only one of those 4 that has the flexibility in our contract to build an unlimited number of qualifying facilities under PURPA, basically distribution connected renewable energy resources, as a hedge against our need to buy power from our wholesale provider. We can also go out and buy what's called economy energy, which we have done many times in the past, where if we find a better deal in the marketplace for our consumers and we can bring energy in at a lower cost than what we can get from Xcel Colorado or PSCO, Public Service Colorado, we have the opportunity to do that in our contract. It's unique. It's very valuable, as you might expect. And through that agreement, we've been able to increase the renewable energy content in the near term, even as we investigate these new, clean, and dispatchable energy resources that we can incorporate into our power supply mix on the long term. So with that flexibility in mind, it's a lot easier for us to meet this 100% clean energy target because of the contract flexibilities that we have. Other cooperatives, other utilities around the country with similar contract flexibility could do the same. But to the extent that others are locked into long-term contracts where their parent provider isn't sharing those same clean energy goals, that can make it difficult for the local utility to meet the needs of its consumers. And it's something that we continue to demonstrate in our work, that this is a way to move forward in a way that meets both the needs of the wholesale customer, the retail customer, and the community leaders. And we feel like we've got something here, and that's one of the reasons why I'm glad to share it with you tonight. So as I mentioned, this is one of our 6 strategic goals. Our strategic plan is online at our website at holycross.com if you're interested in what 2 through 6 are. But strategic goal number 1 is to achieve a 100% carbon-free power supply by 2030. That's one part of it. The other part of it is to become a carbon neutral or better utility across the entire enterprise. So that means our own consumption of electricity, our fleets and their consumption of fuel, our buildings, our facilities, any of the activities that we engage in the community, how our employees commute to work. We feel like it's not enough to set a climate target that talks about your power supply, but you really ought to apply it to your entire operation. And so we've given ourselves an extra 5 years. Here's the little secret though. More than 99.99% of our greenhouse gas emissions as a utility come from, you guessed it, our power supply, the fuels that we use to generate the electricity to deliver to our consumers. So if we can get that first goal, that 100% carbon-free power done right, then the rest of it, the carbon neutral, is just mopping up the remainder. And we're in fact already moving forward on that with some electric fleet vehicles and other transitions in our building energy use as well, including on-site solar here in Glenwood Springs, where I'm sitting to you tonight. It's important to note that all 6 of our strategic goals hang together. So it's not simply about getting sustainability at the cost of affordability or at the cost of reliability or frankly at any cost. As a utility, you expect us, if you're served by Holy Cross, you expect us to do one thing and one thing right, and that is keep the lights on, right? Ideally, those rates are low. Ideally, everyone's working safely, which I would say is a prerequisite for being able to operate as a utility. And ideally, we're also providing that power in a more sustainable way. But those priorities are co-equal. They balance one another. And oftentimes our board of directors, democratically elected by the people that we serve, they're faced with tough challenges about what to maximize at the expense of other things. But the good news story here for us is that we've been able to actually improve our sustainability. As I mentioned, we're up to 57% on a monthly basis, carbon-free energy from 39 just a few short years ago. And we've also saved money on our power supply costs, close to $15 million over the last 3 years in lesser power supply costs that we can invest in modernizing the grid, in hardening our infrastructure against wildfires, in reducing the risk of starting wildfires ourselves, in investing in cybersecurity and privacy to protect the increasing amounts of consumer data that we're dealing with. All of this has happened without a single rate increase since 2018. And we're hopeful that this budget, we're looking at 2022, also is free of a rate increase for the 5th consecutive year in a row. So how do we do that? How do we move forward on our journey to 100? Well, we first of all decrease the size of the problem that we're trying to solve. In every measure, whether it's the buildings, the transport, the direct use of electricity for lighting and other functions, we want people to use electricity more efficiently. So we invest in rebates and incentive programs to encourage energy efficiency, both at our residential and our commercial locations that we serve. And we look to obtain a 0.25% per year in reduction of electric sales from existing uses. And this is really important because, as you see at the bottom, smart electrification is also a very important carbon reduction strategy for the broader economy. Keep in mind that the electric sector is roughly about 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions of the U.S. economy. The other 2/3 are coming from transportation and the fuel used there, and buildings, the fuel used there, along with industrial and other manufacturing processes that primarily use natural gas for process heat. If we can electrify those utilizations of energy in the economy, we can displace a fossil fuel, oil or natural gas, with an increasingly clean electric fuel, especially if it's backstopped by efforts like ours to take that journey to 100% and provide that electricity with a carbon-free footprint. So at the same time, we want people to use electricity for existing purposes more wisely, to help manage their bills, to help reduce existing greenhouse gas emissions from the electric sector. We also want them to use more electricity for more things, for heating, for cooling, for cooking, for driving, for getting around town. That smart electrification is a very important element of our strategy, particularly when you think the costs of the grid could now be stretched over many, many more users and uses of electricity. That means lower prices for everyone involved. In between being efficient on the one side and using more smartly on the other side, we want to make sure that that electricity is coming from a cleaner wholesale power supply. And I'll talk more about that in a moment, but that means incorporating new, clean, dispatchable resources into Holy Cross Energy's power supply mix. That means out with the old and the fossil. And we've got one very big ownership stake in a somewhat infamous power plant named Comanche 3, located in Pueblo, that has provided reliable coal-based electricity to Holy Cross Energy consumers for nearly a decade now. It's an important capacity resource that helps keep the lights on, most recently during the February cold snap. It saved us from being exposed to those natural gas market prices, but at the cost of extra greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So as we balance the affordability and the reliability of the system with the desire to become more sustainable as we provide more clean electricity, how do we transition away from those old reliable fossil assets onto these new and emerging cleaner energy technologies in a way which doesn't sacrifice what we are supposed to do, that one job, which is keep the lights on? That is a core question for us, for Core Electric Cooperative, formerly IREA, the other part owner of Comanche 3, as well as for Xcel Energy here in Colorado, as being discussed in its electric resource plan filing presently before the Public Utility Commission. As I mentioned, we also have some opportunities to create local clean energy resources on our footprint. Holy Cross territory is home to a 12 megawatt biomass plant that runs 24/7, that uses waste wood from our forests, from healthy forest projects that reduce wildfire risk, that thin out dead and dying trees as a result of bark beetle kill. And they bring that resource to us, combust it in a traditional boiler, create reliable and carbon-free power when viewed over the entire life cycle of the wood resource, and provide that capacity that we need to know that we can always keep the lights on no matter what the weather, no matter what the demand. We also have a number of hydropower projects on our system, including some hydro that moves through our system on the way to Aspen. And as you'll hear in a moment, we're increasingly invested in solar, both with and without battery storage, to help make that a dispatchable resource. And then finally, our area is home to a number of coal mines that have long since ceased production, but still continue to outgas methane into the environment. Depending on the science that you read and the people that you talk to, and the length of period of time over which you look, methane is anywhere from 30 to 100 times more potent, molecule for molecule, than the carbon dioxide coming out of our tailpipes or our smokestacks. If we can do something to reduce that methane or eliminate it from going into the atmosphere, we will have done loads of benefit for the climate. And so how about taking that waste methane that's outgassing today, capturing it, putting it through a turbine, making power out of it for a beneficial use, and potentially someday, perhaps even capturing the carbon dioxide itself before it goes into the atmosphere. These coal mine methane projects, again, are reliable. They help keep the lights on, but they also help move us towards a more carbon-free profile, at least one that has less of a climate impact than just simply letting those mines flare their gas into the open environment. And not to be overlooked, but Holy Cross has a very strong commitment to distributed energy resources. We have more than 2,000 net metered PV solar systems on our grid today of the 46,000 customers that we serve. So we're approaching 5%. We're adding rooftop solar. Our goal was 2 megawatts per year. In the last several years, we've been adding it at twice that, 4 megawatts per year. And we're only limited by the amount of production and installation capacity in our area. The consumers would do more if there were more to be done. And so we'll continue to invest in distributed resources, not only in the rooftop solar, but in the smart buildings that can use that solar, in the battery storage behind the meter that can help absorb that solar when the grid doesn't need it, that can dispatch it back into the grid to help us from avoiding to go buy power on the wholesale market, power that's more expensive, power that's not as clean, right? Why can't we bank that clean renewable resource produced right here in our community and actually pay our members, our owners, to help those solar panels run our system alongside all the other resources that we have? So it's a pretty multifaceted strategy that we have, this journey to 100. But as you've heard me say a couple times now, we're already well along the way. We were at 39, we're now at 57. We're going to finish the year on average probably around 50% when we take our seasonality into account. And we've got plans underway to get to 70, 80, maybe even 85% in the next couple of years before the really hard slog to the summit occurs at points after that. And I'll say more about that in a bit. So I can get the next slide, Jim. So this is our progress to date. As I mentioned, we started at 39% when I came on board in 2019. Or 2017. That itself was way up from a much lower number even a few years previous, something in the single digits. So we've been decarbonizing and accelerating our clean energy transition for more than a decade now, and the results are finally starting to pay off. We've got under contract a portion of a larger wind farm located on the eastern plains of Colorado that will give us 100 megawatts of wind capacity, hopefully in the next, I'd say 24 months, if all goes well. There are a lot of issues associated with that, which I'm happy to talk about during the question period. We've also got a similar project that we share with another cooperative where we have 30 megawatts of a much larger solar farm that is also slated to come on board in the next 2 years. And when those two new resources come online and we bring them into our portfolio, you start to get at the pie chart on the right-hand side where our clean and renewable energy content is now approaching 84, 85% by volume. You can see most of it will be made up from the wind farm there in the yellow bar, but a lot of it will also be coming from solar. We'll still have the biomass plant, we'll still have the hydro, we'll still have the coal mine methane, but we'll be displacing a lot of grid mix of power, which is primarily natural gas with some coal, with a cleaner mix of resources. Within our service territory, I'm proud to announce that we're within days of doing a formal ribbon cutting on our 5 megawatt solar project that has just been brought into commission at the Aspen Airport, or a little bit south of that to be exact, in Pitkin County. This Pitkin solar project is our first using bifacial solar panels, where we'll be able to pick up solar production from the reflected sunlight coming off the snowpack in the winter months to help boost production. Really excited about that. It was a decision that the developer, Primergy, approached us with, and it was really creative and innovative. And honestly, those are the partners that we like to work with, that bring the solutions and say, hey, we can actually shrink the footprint, reduce the visual impact that some of the neighbors have been complaining about, still give you the production and use this super cool technology. What do you think? And we were, of course, all gangbusters on it. So we're proud to announce that that one's underway, and we'll have the formal ribbon cutting here later in the month. So we're excited about that. We're also working with some partners with the Orchard Mesa Irrigation District to bring on a new hydro resource west of our service territory and get that brought in. That's the 4.9 megawatts of hydro that you see there. And then I'm really excited about our 3 solar plus storage projects. The smaller one there, the 4.5, 20 megawatt hour, is in partnership with the Colorado Mountain College at its Spring Valley campus, just literally up the hill behind me, working with them and Amoresco and some really innovative and creative approaches. We found a way to help CMC offset 100% of its electricity demand with clean energy produced from that solar array, not only for the Spring Valley campus, but for all the other campuses that are supported in Holy Cross's footprint. So it helped them meet their sustainability goals more than a decade earlier than they thought. And now they're off thinking about buildings and transportation and so forth. So really excited about that project. We also have a pair of solar plus storage projects, one at Rifle and one at Parachute. These are under development by AES on contract to us, 10 megawatts, 20 megawatt hours of solar, DC coupled, so that you can actually throttle and brake the solar output to make it fit any shape that you want. I saw this on display at a project on the island of Kauai when I visited another cooperative there at the end of 2019, and I watched them ramp up their grid scale solar plus storage as the solar on the rooftops was coming down at the end of the day, and they were able to seamlessly match the inputs and the outputs to get to a point where they were able to operate their grid with no frequency fluctuation, no voltage issues, It was an amazing thing to watch. In fact, these solar plus storage combined units really do have a lot of the characteristics of a gas turbine, which traditionally utilities like my own have relied upon to provide that reliability and that resilience of power supply. So we're really excited to bring those on, and I'm pretty sure those won't be the last. We'll have a next round for requests for proposals within the next year to 18 months. Once we get these projects done and dusted and we know more about where we're going and how we're going to solve that last remaining part on the pie there, we'll be able to put an RFP out and hopefully solicit some really good ideas from you and the rest of the community. Jim, let me get the next slide. So on that subject, I mentioned that once we get to this 85%, it's kind of like climbing Everest. We've gotten to base camp 3, and now we're going to make a go at the summit, right? That last 15%, but it's the most dangerous, right? It's the most sheer facing climb. It's the most vertical. It's got the most crevasses in it. To use the mountain metaphor, we got to summon all of our strength and make a go to the summit so that we can get to the top. And when you think about the remaining load that we have to decarbonize, the remaining electricity demand that we have to decarbonize, we're basically playing a matching game, trying to fill in the valleys in our profile that exist when we have more load than we have resources to serve it with. We want to fill those gaps, but we don't want to do it in a way which takes the time where we have more resources than we have load to serve and make that challenge even worse. We want to try to smooth out the peaks and the valleys. And what we really need more than more clean energy is we need flexible clean energy. And our friends at the Rocky Mountain Institute, the Innovation Center here in Basalt, powered by Holy Cross Clean Energy, they've been able to do some great work to support our thinking on this, and frankly, the industry's thinking as a whole. This chart shows how a mix of distributed energy resources, as well as that electrification that I mentioned, can balance the system. We can take air conditioning, we can take plug loads, we can take water heating, we can take electric vehicle charging, and we can manipulate those in a way where we still get the same comfort, we still get the same mobility. The vehicle's still charged enough for us to drive it where we need to go. The building is still comfortable. The manufacturer still makes the product, but the when and the how they do it is changed in time to take advantage of times where there's too much renewables on the system. And we're able to literally almost give it away for free for them to absorb or use or store. And at other times we're saying, hey, wow, we don't have enough. It's going to cost you a lot more right now to use power because it's a scarce resource. And if that market signal is something that'll help you conserve, we'll actually pay you a little bit for it. And so you can imagine like a thermostat heats up the house on a warm winter's day when we have more than enough solar than we know what to do with, taking advantage of those electrons that we've already paid for on the system, maybe with a beneficial rate that encourages them to do so. And then instead of cranking the heat later on when everybody gets home from work or home from school, that building's already warm. It's already comfortable when you get there. And in fact, it's riding down because it's so well insulated that it loses very little thermal energy over the course of time. And maybe those efficiency upgrades came because of a rebate from Holy Cross so that we can use the energy that we do use more efficiently. That moves the energy resources out of that trough in the middle during the noon time of day. It actually allows you to bring up the demand from the bottom of the curve to that green dotted line that you see there. And it actually helps suppress the demand later on in the evening where we would otherwise be firing up a gas turbine or going to buy power on the market to meet that peak. The building just rides through. It doesn't demand the energy. We don't have to pay the demand charges. As a result, our rates are lower, right? Maybe even the batteries on your electric vehicle or behind your meter sitting there in your garage or at the side of your house are actually discharging some of their stored energy into the grid. They're performing like little power plants, all of them together in harmony as virtual power plants, providing us with the energy that we need here in our community in a resilient way, in a way where we're paying our owner members and we're not paying some wholesale market outside of our state or outside of our region. So we really see this distributed energy resource mix as being an important part of how we get from that base camp to the summit. In fact, I'm not sure how we do it with building more big stuff. We need more little stuff, more flexible stuff. And frankly, we need more people to participate in the management of that grid directly, whether it's through price signals or calls for conservation or calls for consumption. These are the programs and the services that I think a distribution utility like us will increasingly be called on by you to provide as we move forward in that clean energy transition. So Jim, if I could get the next slide. That's one of the reasons why we're investing heavily in programs like our charge at home, charge at work programs, or our electrify your ride program. Basically, this set of program activities, the main thing we're trying to do is to get people to ride or drive electric. Drive your personal vehicle, drive your work vehicle, ride your school bus, ride your transit bus. We want to make sure that you have every opportunity to choose an electric vehicle and that you're not afraid of running out of juice, not afraid of that range anxiety that, like you see in the bottom left picture there, just outside the window here in Carbondale. You've got access to a fast charger in your community. You've got access to level 2 charging at your home or at your workplace, where we've provided those chargers for free, and we finance the installation costs without a single dollar leaving your pocket and without a single percentage of interest rate. Because investing in that infrastructure not only helps you, but it helps us as well, particularly if we can manage that charging in a way that gives us the benefits, that charges during the midday peak with solar and avoids charging during the afternoon peak with grid electricity that's got a carbon footprint on it. So we've got a number of programs, from incentives to support for installation for fast chargers by our community members near the town center, near the park, near the hospital, near the school, the places where cars tend to go. Let's put the fast chargers there so people can buzz in 30, 60 minutes and away they go. One of our more recent installations is a bank of 8 Tesla chargers at the Wendy's and service station right off I-70 in Edwards. We've got 4 Electrify America chargers coming very shortly behind that. So it will literally be a charging hub. And the owner of that facility, who's operated a travel plaza for the longest period of time, he said, you know what, I see the future. People are going to stop here not because they want to fill up on gas, but they're going to want to fill up on electrons. And either way, I want them to come in and order from the Wendy's or come into the convenience store and grab something to drink, use the facilities, rest, hang out, right? But I want to make sure I capture that emerging audience. In the first month of operation, we sold 37 megawatt hours more of electricity from those 8 Tesla chargers alone. 37 megawatt hours. Okay, that's a pretty good chunk of electricity. I won't tell you how much my Tesla personally charged up, but it was a pretty good amount. So I'll confess to it for sure. But you know, the other thing is we're working on transit buses with the Roaring Fork Transit Authority and the Eagle County Transit. We're working with school districts, the school buses, like the one shown on the right there, manufactured by Proterra. A school bus, a transit bus, over the course of a year will use as much electricity as a hotel. So if you like load growth as a utility and you want to encourage hotels and Bitcoin miners and all that, encourage the transit buses too. Get people riding electric. If you're concerned about energy equity and you want to provide the benefits of carbon-free mobility, do so for the bus riding public, most of whom are income qualified and frankly don't have the wherewithal to go out and buy a new electric vehicle at the $40,000 mark today, right? Give them the benefits of electric transit, cleaner air, healthier ride by investing in the transit infrastructure, not only the buses themselves, but the infrastructure, the fueling infrastructure that is needed at the bus depots to fuel them up. One of the nice things about electric buses is they tend to be garaged between 2 and 5 a.m. in the morning because that's when nobody's riding on them. In Colorado, when is our winds peak? Between 2 and 5 a.m. in the morning. So we can charge up those buses on Colorado wind, and we would take what is an excessive resource that we would otherwise curtail, which kind of makes me cry, and we put it on a useful purpose by powering up the buses for the next day's ride. Great stuff. And you can see in 2020 alone the progress that we've made in installing infrastructure. Similar progress this year. Get the next slide. Another one of our programs that recently is underway now, last 2 to 3 months, I think, we've had this open, is our Power Plus energy storage program. If you've heard of Green Mountain Power's energy storage program for its consumers, this is very similar. What we do is we provide access to Tesla Powerwalls that you see here, installed at one of our buildings here on the Glenwood campus as one of our first installations. We provide no money down, 0% financing for the cost of the battery, as well as for all the installation costs, working in partnership with our local installers, of which we have 3 that are now Tesla certified and entering the program. We also provide a monthly bill credit to the consumer to knock down the price of the loan payment that they pay us back for to own the battery over the next 10 years. That bill credit is kind of like a capacity payment. We pay the consumer the bill credit in exchange for being able to use the battery for our own grid services purposes, within reason, only a finite number of times per year, only within a preset range. There's always enough juice in there to ride through the outage. In fact, as part of our program, we'll even fill you up to 100% if we know we have a planned outage coming or we expect a storm on the way, so that you'll never suffer from an outage again. In fact, as you see at the bottom, in that caretaker house, which is where a couple of our employees live, right here on our campus, you would think, Power Quality Central at the utility campus. In the 4th quarter of last year, so the last 3 months of the year, we had 12 power interruptions that would have been blinks or outages or something noticeable, with 290 outage minutes saved. So they would have been out of power like 4.5 hours, if I have that math right, without these batteries. With these batteries, not a one, right? And that's the consumer benefit. The grid benefit comes when you see on the right-hand side, we're able to, again, charge up in the off-peak hours with increasingly clean energy that's coming from those new wind, new solar resources in the overnight. Well, not solar, but certainly the wind. And then in the afternoon, when we hit our peak time, we're able to discharge the battery onto the grid and avoid having to go to the wholesale market or to our power supplier to buy dirtier, more expensive energy. So the consumer gets the resilience benefit. We get the flexibility that we need to take us from our journey from 85 to 100%. We're really excited about this program. We've had over 100 registrants sign up in the first 2 months of the program. Green Mountain Power has been at it a little longer than us. They're closer to 1,600 on a utility that's about 4 times the size that we are. So we're making good progress, and we're really excited about this. And we certainly would encourage any of our consumers that are interested in joining to find out more at Holy Cross Energy or holycross.com/PowerPlus. Next slide. So far I've focused on little things, solar PV, batteries, etc. But the real fun is when you get them all to work in concert together. And we were confronted with a question from the town of Basalt and a number of its partners in the summer of 2018. They were building an affordable housing project, but the town had just taken on a carbon-free commitment to avoid its greenhouse gas footprint in 10 years' time. And so they were really reticent to run new natural gas supply into this development, which sits on land just behind the Basalt High School, and really targeting our teachers and our working population for whom, frankly, affordable housing doesn't exist. The average home price in the town of Basalt was $750,000. The average teacher salary was more like 50 grand. You do the numbers, even at low interest rates, that ain't going to work. So the school district got together with the county and with the town, with our local Habitat for Humanity chapter, and conceived an affordable housing project that along the way became a net zero affordable housing project because of the restrictions put in place by the town on the use of new natural gas supply. So the project managers all came to us and said, hey, utility, is there something we can do here? Coincidentally, we've been doing some research with my old team at NREL, looking at what it would take to create these affordable housing, these housing communities that were net zero. And we said, we've been doing this work in the lab. We'd love to take it into the field if your residents would be willing to engage in a pretty big experiment with us. So the first 4 houses then were immediately outfit by us with donated solar PV, battery storage, level 2 EV charging, a heat pump water heater that we could control, and an air source heat pump. So all the major loads for comfort, function, mobility, etc. Each of these were individually managed with a controller device. Ultimately, as the project went forward, we realized that we could control the 5 DERs as an integrated set with a single controller. Maybe someday the utility meter itself has the smarts to orchestrate and determine the optimal flow of electricity and services. For example, could you imagine that if there's more demand for electricity than the solar panels can produce, and the homeowner doesn't want to pull from the grid because they want to use most of their local solar on site, that when the vehicle plugs into the level 2 EV charger, the battery discharges to meet the extra demand, or the dishwasher stops running because it knows it needs to take a break so that we can charge the electric vehicle because the consumer is afforded that higher priority. Or the air source heat pump takes a little bit of a powder as well and lets the temperature rise or fall in the building envelope so that it doesn't draw at a time where there's not enough solar on the PV because there's a cloud that's passed over or there's a storm in the area. If you think about how these DERs can interact, how each of them has flexibility, but then can key off of one another and actually team with one another. And now if you expand that, not just within a home, but now to the neighboring homes around it, as we demonstrated in this project, where we now have 4 houses, each with 5 DERs, and the DERs are all sharing and comparing and listening and coordinating. It's kind of the electricity version of borrowing a cup of sugar from your neighbors. If you're throwing a big party and you need more electricity than you can create yourself, but your neighbor's not home, you can borrow it from your neighbor. Your neighbor gets a bill credit for selling their power, you pay the bill credit for consuming it. So this is a brave new world, but it's one where actually we're more interactive, we're more involved. Some of it is probably autonomous, some of it is probably set by you and forgotten. Some of you that are out there that are really geeky on this stuff might want to manage it from your app. We want to make sure that we can provide that customer experience to you no matter what your desires are. Your Geek Level 1, Geek Level 10. And this Basalt Vista Affordable Housing Project was a great one to give us the confidence that if we installed these DERs, they could provide us with the grid services that we need to get to 100%, while also providing lower cost bills and higher reliability power to our customers. So it's a win-win for everybody. Get the last slide, Jim, I think this is. Yeah, last substantive slide here. We've been talking about technology, but alongside the technology is also the rates and the programs that allow our consumers to benefit from it economically. So you've heard me refer to a couple of these, the distribution flexibility payment. It's a capacity payment for the right to use a distributed resource in a certain mode to help the grid. So it's basically we're buying the option to discharge and charge the battery or to manage the charging of the electric vehicle. Pretty soon we'll be able to buy that right from a consumer that wants to put their DERs into the mix to help support the grid. We talked about on-bill financing. That's our DER service agreement. We're just providing you with power service, not through the poles and the wires, but through the PV on your rooftop and the car in your garage and the battery in your workshop. So it's a different way of providing services. It's not foreign to utilities. Well, at least it shouldn't be. And I think increasingly you'll see a bunch of us doing more like this in the future. We also have a couple of incentive programs to encourage those that are not already enrolled in some of our control programs to actually do some demand response. Not only demand response down in a traditional sense through our peak time payback program, where we'll pay people 50 cents or even $1 per kilowatt hour that they conserve during a predefined period, because that actually, believe it or not, saves us money. But through our Green Up program, we'll actually pay that same incentive for you to use more. Why? Because the alternative would be for us to pay penalties or to curtail the resources that we've already paid for. And why not put them onto some beneficial use? Why not encourage you to use those resources in a way which fosters your carbon footprint and helps us mitigate some of our costs and some of our contracts? We do have a time of use rate. It's an optional rate structure right now. There is some discussion about moving that to a more mandatory time of use rate similar to what PSCO, Public Service Company of Colorado, is doing with its smart meter rollout. So if you're an XL customer and you get that smart meter, you're going on a time of use rate. Part of the deal. And you'll have a little bit more thinking to do about your electricity every month, but you'll probably have a lot more saving to do as well. And then lastly, for our consumers that are in a hurry, they say, you know what, Bryan, it's really great that you went from 39 to 57, but we want to be at 100 tomorrow. What can we do to top us off? We have the Pure program, which is a green pricing program that encourages consumers to buy the remaining amount of their energy needs beyond what we're already providing as green. They're able to substitute their slice of our system for a green power purchase that's dedicated directly to them and done for them, and with the RECs retired for them. And that is something that allows our members to choose 100% renewable energy today. And the more of them that do so, the more it's a price signal and a signal of intent on the part of our membership base to get on at Holy Cross and accelerate your transition to this clean energy future. As I mentioned last year, we were at 44. Thanks to the Pure program, we got to 47. I would expect to see a similar bump. If we get to 50, maybe they'll take us to 53. And we'll keep going. We'll keep rolling. As the numbers get higher, the amount they have to pay to get to 100% gets lower. Eventually it disappears because we're all there. And that's our hope, to get there by 2030. So with that, Jim, we'll get the last slide. I think that's it for the content. Yeah, and you can find out more about any of the things that we're doing on our website there at holycross.com. We certainly think that this is a pathway that other utilities can follow, given the flexibility in their contracts and in their relationships with their wholesale power provider, and frankly with their consumers, their member owners in the case of a co-op, their constituents in the case of a muni, or their customer base in the case of an IOU. I like to say that our business is to give our customers what they want before somebody else does. And boy, howdy, I don't think that's a co-op thing. I think that's a business thing, and it's pretty smart no matter where you sit. So with that, thanks again. I'll look forward to the questions.
Bryan, thank you very much. That is the second time I've heard this briefing, and I am no less excited the second time around than the first. I really applaud the vision and the expertise that you're bringing to Holy Cross. So thank you very much. We appreciate you being with us tonight. We have a lot of questions, but I'm actually going to start off with one of mine. Lithium-ion battery storage gets most of the press because of the rapidly declining prices and their role in electric vehicles, but they come with limitations. Are you looking at other forms of energy storage to get beyond, a typical 4-hour backup with lithium-ion batteries, high mass flywheels, phase change materials, hydrogen? And do you think diversity in energy storage is critical?
To answer your last question first, absolutely. We know that batteries are really good in the 2 to 4 hour range, but we also know that in a high renewable system, there are going to be times where we're going to have days of challenges with respect to wind and solar. And in some cases, that's going to be a large amount of our energy supply that's not available. And so not only do we need long duration storage, but we need large volume storage. And so two of the things that we've looked at, you mentioned one, hydrogen, to the extent that we can harness the oversupply of wind and solar at some hours of the day, crack water to create hydrogen, store that hydrogen locally, run it back through a fuel cell later on, or run it back through a gas turbine as a blend, or even as a pure hydrogen gas turbine. That offers some great reliability benefits for those long duration outage avoidance situations. The other one that we're looking at is pump storage hydro. Here in Western Colorado, we got altitude. And if we can use ponds at different elevations and we can move the water up and down depending on what the need is, that would be great. In fact, some of the ski areas that we serve, they already have snowmaking ponds that exist at different altitudes on their resorts. So perhaps in partnership with them, we'll be able to find some projects that work.
Thank you. Let me move on to the audience questions. You mentioned favorable contracts that allow you choice on both cost and energy source. When were these negotiated, and what must other co-ops do to negotiate similarly beneficial contracts?
Yeah, these were negotiated in 1992 as a result of the bankruptcy of our then G&T provider, Colorado Youth. As part of the negotiations, we were negotiating the terms of our agreement to move to XL Colorado Fiesco as a wholesale customer, and our legal counsel very foresightedly said, we want to be able to hedge our existence. We want to be able to have options for our members so that we can source power at the lowest cost, and ultimately, in our case now, source it with the cleanest carbon footprint as well. So it was a very far-sighted negotiation. It was something that, frankly, we didn't really use until the last 10 years or so, and it's something that I think should be included in future arrangements, and it's something that we will certainly be looking for, because there's so many suppliers. Even the existence of a wholesale market potentially in the West gives us an opportunity to always seek that least cost power supply for the members that we serve.
Thank you. Is it a good idea to emphasize micro residential rooftop solar projects as opposed to larger commercial and municipal solar farms over parking lots and brownfields?
I think you need both. You need a spectrum of resources. You need big and cheap. You need small and flexible. I think the reality around rooftop solar is that a lot of consumers are putting rooftop solar on their homes, not necessarily just because it's economic, but because they like having their own power plant on their roof, or they're just environmentally motivated to do so. And I think for us, we want to make sure that those resources are not detracting from the grid. They're not pulling necessary resources from the grid at times where we can least afford to spare them. They're not creating grid upgrade charges to manage their solar system without providing something of value back to the community. So we look at rooftop solar not as an either or proposition, but an and. Our Pitkin County solar project is exactly what you described. It was an old brownfield site that frankly wasn't going to get developed. It was where they had dumped solids from the local wastewater treatment plant, to be honest with you. And we turned that into a really neat clean energy resource for the community. So here at Holy Cross, it's a false contrast. It's both.
Is Holy Cross considering hydrogen EVs for medium and heavy duty fleet vehicles? And this comes from a member of the Colorado Hydrogen Network.
We haven't viewed hydrogen as a transportation fuel at this point. As I mentioned a moment ago, hydrogen offers a long-term storage, a long-duration storage benefit that we think is worth exploring. But in terms of our heavy-duty fleet vehicles, everything that I've read in the literature suggests that hydrogen could have an application there, more so than when I was in the White House and we worked on the hydrogen highway for the light-duty vehicles. For obvious reasons, that didn't pencil out very well. So that's something that we'll continue to evaluate. I will say that when we get to the heavy-duty fleet in our vehicle fleet, I'm going to be a very happy guy because we'll probably be 99.98% decarbonized at that point, and we'll be trying to chase the last 500 or 1,000 tons per year that those vehicles comprise out of the million metric tons we had just a few years ago.
Here's a great question, given the unique nature of your service territory. How big of a consumer are the ski resorts, and how does that figure into your operations given their seasonal nature?
Yeah, they're pretty big consumers. I don't have offhand the amount of consumption, but it's certainly double digits in terms of our total sales. And in the summer, our summer peak is a little under 150 megawatts capacity. In the winter, we've been pushing 260 to 270. And all of that is ski resorts, but it's also hotels and hospitality activities and just everything associated with having the winter sports and the winter recreation. So as we look ahead into the future, our bigger challenge is going to be if we're trying to electrify all that natural gas in the winter when people are using it, we're doing that on top of our system peak already. And so we're taking a peaky system and making it peakier. Interestingly enough, we're also starting to see a bit of a bump in our summer peak as well. And sadly, I think that's due to the fact that people are installing air conditioning here, whereas 10 or 15 years ago, no one ever thought about air conditioning because it never really got hot.
When Holy Cross received the Climate Courage Awards, you mentioned a program to incentivize EV charging at home. Was that successful, and could it be a model for other co-ops and utilities?
Yes, it's successful, and yes, it already is a model for other co-ops and utilities. We've had more than 400, I believe, level 2 EV chargers installed at homes and at workplaces as a result of that Charge at Home, Charge at Work program, which I summarized a little bit earlier. We've supplemented that with fast charging throughout our communities. Anywhere you go in a Holy Cross territory, you're never far away from the charging infrastructure. So don't worry about the range anxiety thing. And increasingly with the state's investments along the major highways of our state, the fast charging along those corridors make long haul driving to go see the leaves or to go recreate at a nearby resort. It makes it good as well. A little tidbit for you. So we finance the cost of the install of the EV charger. We also provide a $650 rebate to make that charger literally free. Right? All $650 of the cost we pay a rebate for. We're finding that we're actually selling a lot more than $650 in kilowatt hours of electricity to that charger over the first 24 months of the program. We're actually, you know, the charger has a 3-year life on it. Within the first year, we've already sold extra electricity to make back the cost of that rebate, so that we're actually increasing our sales of electricity, and it's benefiting the consumer, but it's also benefiting our bottom line as well. And as a co-op, we pass that on in the form of lower rates to our members.
Can you speak about the difficulties and or cost of wheeling wind and solar power from the Eastern Plains over transmission lines that Holy Cross doesn't own? Does Holy Cross support an RTO in Colorado?
So yes, RTOs in Colorado are a very important part of our clean energy future. They allow us to source the energy from where it's most efficiently produced in Eastern Colorado in the renewable energy zones where our projects are being located. It would allow us to seamlessly move that power across the transmission system to our consumers, to our delivery ports here on the Western Slope. Right now, Xcel Energy is our wholesale provider. They also provide our transmission services. Again, as part of that 1992 bankruptcy settlement, we have a very unique transmission agreement with them where we're in effect joint owners of a combined transmission system comprised of their assets and ours. You might think of it as an RTO of 2. And so we basically pay our load ratio share of the transmission system costs every year, and we square up and settle up every year as part of that. That's an agreement that probably will get normalized into a standard FERC-approved transmission tariff at some point in the future, at which case we sign up for transmission service associated with these projects. We designate them as network resources. We pay the freight to get them here, and it's a pretty straightforward deal, at least until we get an RTO in place where now we're not moving the power across multiple grids to get it here. It's a single RTO, a single price, and it becomes a lot easier.
This next one is actually 3 questions in one. I'm going to ask them to you one at a time. Do you happen to know if the various building and planning authorities in your service area have any plans to ban the use of natural gas for space and domestic hot water in residential and business buildings?
So the town of Basalt has already done that, and I hinted at that during our discussion of the Basalt Vista project. That's what brought that all-electric affordable housing program to be. I know that other constituencies in our area are considering that, either informally or formally. I'm not aware of anybody that's close to doing that at this point, but I think as we look at all of the climate action collaboratives and all the groups that are out there that are advocating for climate action in our communities that we serve, a reduction in the use of natural gas is certainly a major tenet of their strategy. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see others come forward and say, look, on new construction, we're just not going to go there anymore. And we're going to extend it possibly to retrofits as well.
Part two, what role, if any, will Holy Cross Energy play in partnering with the local building and planning authorities to encourage the elimination of gas for residential and business heating? I think you just touched on that.
Yeah. You know, one more point on that, Jim, is that we, like every other utility, we are the last ones to find out about a project. We usually only find out about a project when the service connection request comes in, and by then it's designed, it's built. There's very little that you can do with it to help it become more environmentally sustainable. So we're actively hiring people. We're dedicating staff. We're reaching out into our communities. We're working with the planning and zoning and the county commissioners. We're tracking items that are on the agenda, the development items that are on there, reaching out to the developers. We're trying to get to people earlier in the process to say, hey, look, have you thought about all of these possibilities to use electricity, to do so in a way which helps manage the cost to your residents or to your owners or your businesses, but it also helps them achieve an environmental outcome, and that might help you with the marketing and the promotion of your facility. We have one new lodge in Snowmass called the Electric Path Lodge that is sold out immediately because of the fact that it was an all-electric residence by choice, and that it was powered by 100% clean Holy Cross Energy through our Pure program. Future versions of this construction will include battery storage on site, will include large PV arrays on the rooftop, because they're targeting a market that wants to live and work and recreate sustainably. And I think that's the trend of the future, and I would just encourage all utilities to get out there and be proactive, because you can't do anything if you don't know anything, right? So if we get a project early, it's a lot easier for us to help work in partnership to make it more sustainable.
Part three, what planning is Holy Cross doing to prepare for the impacts of all-electric space and domestic hot water heating in new construction and retrofits? And this, I would say, is a very real concern for utilities across the country as beneficial electrification gains momentum.
Yeah, and I'll just go back to my earlier point. We don't even know what we're planning for at this point, and most utilities are in a similar bucket. We don't know what the expected build out, what is the growth plan of the towns and the communities that we serve? What are the plans of the developers to do infill or new greenfield development? How many new vehicles do we think we're going to get? All of this is informed speculation unless you actually get involved with those entities and you sit down with them and you engage in planning efforts together. So a great example of this, the town of Eagle recently announced they wanted to go 100% carbon free, not just electricity, but transport, buildings, the whole enchilada by 2030. The very next day, the mayor and city council member that led the town council member that led the thing called me up on the phone and said, all right, great, we need to sit down. We need to figure out how to plan this now that we've set this ambitious goal. You better believe your backside we've got to start planning. But the good news is that we're thinking about an energy master plan that accompanies the land use plan, that accompanies the water, all the other plans that towns typically do. We said, hey, let's apply that same mindset to energy and bring the utility into the process at the very beginning so that we can identify in the town boundary where are the places that we're going to put the solar. Are we going to need to put solar on all the roofs to create the amount of energy that you need to consume locally within your footprint? What are we going to do about battery storage? Where are we going to put the chargers? How many vehicles do you expect? Where do people move? So what does your transportation plan look like? Can we get your transit buses associated with this? Is it also, can we do something about codes and standards for building, heating and cooling requirements, that every new building has got to have a smart thermostat associated with it that must be enrolled in this program so that we can harness the grid services benefits. So it starts to create this holistic conversation where we're not just shooting in the dark and going, oh, well, we think there might be 10 vehicles on that street, and then the 11th person gets a Tesla and plugs it in and the transformer blows up because we didn't get the number right? You got to sit down and you got to get involved in the fabric of the communities that you serve. And again, it's not just co-op, it's muni, it's IOU. I mean, for muni, it should be easy. You are the community, right? Co-op, you are the community. My investor-owned utility friends, though, I think would be well served to do the same.
How do you manage the distributed energy resource system? Do you use blockchains? Also, what other types of storage do you use?
Yeah, so I neglected to mention that. In the Basalt Vista project, we used a local controller that was part of an NREL-funded experiment that we were able to get some cost sharing from for the federal government. We quickly realized that having a controller on every distributed energy device was going to be cost prohibitive. And we said, are there ways in which we can manage and aggregate these in a way that works? We checked out a lot of commercially available DERMS, DER management system programs, and we found that they were very limited in terms of what they could talk to, who they could talk to, what they were providing. They were these sort of closed ecosystems, if you will. They really worked well for large utilities where you could manage the types of resources that you were putting out onto the grid. But you know, we're rural Colorado. People will do stuff because we told them to do the opposite, right? So we know that people are going to bring their own devices to the party, and they're going to bring us, and they're not going to bring us the Tesla Powerwall. They're going to bring us the LG Chem battery and say, well, can I sign up for your program with this? And I'm in the yes business. I want to say yes. I want to figure out how to do it. So we happened upon a partner called Camu Energy that was a group of ex-Googlers that were taking some of the learnings that they came about in figuring out how to spread the computing requirements amongst many different nodes to run Google search and the web server and all the products then. They said, you know, we could take that same sort of mindset and figure out how to spread the limited amount of energy to all the nodes on the distribution grid and use the same sort of computation, the same sort of algorithm to make it kind of run in the background as something I like to call a self-driving grid. And it was a really inspiring concept. And I said, I want to get in, I want to help you guys, give you guys some data, do some things. And they built a platform that as long as there is what we call an API, an application programming interface, that allows the device to communicate with the Camu platform for operating our grid, we can plug any distributed resource into that ecosystem and talk to it, manage it, control it, pay it. We haven't used the blockchain yet, and I say yet because we may be going that direction, because right now, settling at the monthly bill, looking at the aggregate pushes and pulls across the meter is good enough. If we get to a point where we have a more granular price signal, where the time of day matters for how much you get paid, then we're going to have to start being much more accurate about transaction and transactive energy and really understanding who gave what to whom at what time for what price. And then we'll aggregate all that together, but we need that record in between the monthly billing cycles. And that's where I think the blockchain may come into our work in the future.
What do you think of the idea of WAPA's dams for pump storage and generation?
Well, WAPA's dams aren't doing very well for hydro generation given the drought. So if we can find another purpose for them, I think that would be excellent. You know, the Bureau of Reclamation does operate pump storage just over the hill from us on the way to Leadville. On the other side of Independence Pass, there's a pump storage hydro that's there. I think if the WAPA facilities cease to function as reliable sources of hydropower on a regular basis because the water flows are just too variable, I think being able to look at those as opportunities for pump storage, it's worth doing.
Let me ask this next one in a more general fashion. Do you know what the requirements are for getting into one of the Basalt Vista affordable housing units? Yeah,
so we had to be, you had to be from a particular community. So there were 27 houses in the development. Only the 4 had the DERs associated with them. Others have solar panels, but they don't, and they may even have battery storage, but they don't have the full complement of things that we provided in the first 4. That being said, some of them were set aside because the school district donated the land. So some of those were set aside for teachers at the local high school or in the school district. Some of them because Pitkin County developed or provided the public works free of charge, so the roads, the sewer, what have you, the other infrastructure. So the county got a certain allotment for county workers for workforce housing, and then the rest was done by lottery. for those that were income qualified through one of the various state programs. So it is really a means-tested, affordable housing project that I would suggest we need more of across the state.
Do you feel that a goal to put distributed energy resource system on every home and business to provide power resiliency for critical loads, for grid outages, and for curtailment of peak demand when the grid is up? Let's see. And so we create equitable access to always having power while also reducing costs.
So if I got the question right, do I believe that it's, chicken in every pot, solar on every roof, battery in every garage? At this point, I would say there are applications where it doesn't make sense to do that. The grid electricity that we provide is extremely reliable, and we run and take pride in running a very reliable and resilient distribution delivery system. That is not an outage. That is my energy efficient sensor over there. So I just want to be clear, right?
I thought it was the Halloween mode.
Yeah, it was like on cue. Here I am. We run a reliable system, and boom, the lights go out. No, I think that for a lot of our consumers, the grid supplied electricity is going to do them just fine, particularly if we're able to get to 100% clean energy. Then I would say, well, what is the benefit to them of having rooftop solar and batteries on their homes or in their multifamily house? If they have a critical load, if they have a business that's electricity sensitive, then absolutely, it's worth paying for. I think the benefit of distributed resources comes, one, by supplanting with clean energy the dirtier energy that you're getting from your power grid. But if a utility like mine cleans up its act, then the real value of the distributed energy resource is that reliability and resilience, that extra measure of reliability and resilience that accrues to you, the customer. And in that case, I think it's something that you, the customer, would then decide whether you're willing to pay for. Do I believe that low-income populations should have equitable access to it? Absolutely. And we'll help them if they want to access distributed resources on terms and conditions that they can afford. But I don't think that it's a socialized guarantee that every new house ought to come with one of these. I think we ought to be fit for purpose.
By the way, that look is great. The screen illumination with the dark background. So,
I know.
Very Halloween. Have you looked at the Great Britain Octopus Energy? They are partnering with Tesla and show huge growth. And I believe this is referring to Tesla's filing to become a power and energy provider in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, I'm very well aware of that model. We've had some conversations with Octopus ourselves here in the United States, and I would expect to see them providing energy services in a lot of different ways. Right now, that model works best in a competitive retail market, so something like they have in Texas, or by being a provider of services to a local utility like mine or a community choice association in California. I think we're aspiring to do a lot of that work ourselves. But if a group like Octopus can come along and provide a similar service to our members at a lower cost, I think the co-op way would be that we would step out of the way and focus on our core function of running the distribution delivery system and doing that extremely well, and allowing our members to, make the choice to go with a lower cost supplier. I think we've got some natural advantages. We're going to continue to do that as long as we can. And where there's an opportunity to partner with Octopus to provide some reliable services, or any other service provider for that matter, it would be in our advantage to check that out. And really what they do is they're buying and selling power. They're buying it on the wholesale market, they're selling it to the retail consumer, and they're managing all the risk in between. And something that utilities are already doing here in Colorado today. So let's see what the advantage is, and let's have that conversation.
And I believe Tesla's part in that is the software that they've developed to do this rapid trading of energy services in real time.
Yeah, and that brings up a good point, Jim. When you're on a bilateral contract with a fixed price over 15, 20, 30 years, in the case of the tri-state member, rapid trading doesn't do anything for you. You're
Right.
buying at 6.5 and you're selling at 6.5. So what? So I think there's a need to have a much more dynamic market, dynamic pricing signal, and that really doesn't happen unless we go into a regional transmission organization that has a wholesale market associated with it. It's hard to have a dynamic retail price without a dynamic wholesale price as well.
Yeah, let's see. I think, let me just check the time here. Still have 15 minutes. We have a few more questions. I understand that Aspen addresses excessive energy use by the super rich by hefty permit fees, for example, driveway heating, or gives them the choice to offset with carbon-free on-site production. What is your take on such local policies?
Well, I think those local policies are driven by the local decision makers that have the right to dictate how those communities are governed, whether it's your HOA or your city council, town council, or your county commission. So I'm not going to say good, bad, or otherwise, but I do know that the REP program, the Residential Energy Mitigation Program, as they call it up in Aspen, has funded a number of important developments that have improved the ability of the grid in that portion of our valley to absorb more renewable energy. They've funded rooftop solar, they've funded community projects, they're getting involved in transportation. So I think it's actually a pretty creative program to, in effect, offset the impacts of those that are going to have a larger carbon footprint with projects that help mitigate that footprint on the other side.
Next question.
Lights on here. Keep going.
I want to make sure that I heard correctly. Earlier in the Q&A, did you say, quote, self-driving grid? If so, how would you differentiate that description from autonomous?
I wouldn't. I mean the same thing. Autonomous grid, self-driving grid, one and the same. Self-driving is just, I think it's a little bit more catchier term because it plays off of the self-driving car, that whole thing. The concept is the same, that basically the devices themselves, they understand their state of charge or their state of production or their state of consumption. They coordinate with one another, knowing what the state of their neighbors is and what's being demanded. They sort of determine amongst themselves with the help of a controller or a software algorithm what the optimal power flow is between those distributed energy resources and between that set of resources and the distribution grid. And that process of determining the optimal power flow, they understand what their new set points have to be, and so they each adjust autonomously to reflect that optimal. And they do that continuously over time so that everything is ideally the voltage, the frequency, the power flow, the reactive power, all of the grid state variables are near their optimums, not only locally, but throughout the distribution grid. And in a longer term sci-fi world, the grid operators are sitting there similar to the air traffic controllers. They're monitoring the flow of traffic. They're looking for exceptions. They're helping with challenges, but they're not manually cranking tap changers and things up and down. All that is happening kind of autonomously through the software platform and in a way which is super efficient and ultimately lower cost for our consumers while balancing all the variability of the wind and solar, right?
Bryan, I would like to go back to a previous discussion on your working with the jurisdictional building departments. I know in my house, the reason I can get away with only running my air source mini split heat pump for about an hour a year is because of passive solar design, air tightness, and ultra insulation. In other words, passive efficiency has to go hand in hand with renewable energy. How closely do you work with your jurisdictional building departments, and how cooperative are they in partnering with you for your ultimate objectives?
Yeah, I think our conversations with our local jurisdictions have really focused on the adoptions of modern building codes and standards, not passive house so much as just the model energy codes from the most recent vintage, and that, as you know, is a challenge sometimes procedurally to get those adopted by the local jurisdictions and then disseminated out to the construction authorities, incorporated in the permit processes. But that's a big part of our energy efficiency program, is making sure that we're communicating with those local authorities and letting them know what the state of the art is, what the state of the technology is. Doing things like harmonizing our rebates and coordinating our rebates for energy efficient devices, for weatherization, for income qualified assistance with bills, and also extra measures for building insulation and other things like that. So I wouldn't say that it's 100% where we want it to be. We'd love to be more aggressive and involved on things, particularly new construction on the front end, like I mentioned earlier. And I'm starting to see some encouraging developments in that regard. But building codes and standards, that's where it's at if you want to change the building stock. And the reason we want to do that is once you've built the building, it's there for 50, 75, 100 years. It's carbon inertia. It's in the system. And until you can get that building swapped out for something else, it's going to be there for a while.
And I will say that's one area that we have a lot of trouble with in El Paso County, because there's tremendous power from the home building lobby, the Home Builders Association, and a lot of pushback every time a new code comes out to amend it, to essentially gut it every time the new IECC comes out. Next question, what several end uses and areas do you see to be the most difficult to decarbonize?
Boy, howdy, the end use that I think is going to be the most difficult to decarbonize is actually, I think, heating. Industrial strength heating is going to be really difficult to decarbonize. Manufacturing processes that rely on natural gas as a very important source of high intensity heat. Anything that uses that high intensity, so steel production and other things, those are going to be really important to get straightened away. I was actually a co-author on a science magazine paper a few years back, where we looked at the hard to electrify sectors. Aviation is another one of them, although I've seen some impressive progress as of late with electric aviation. So there's some encouragement there. There may be some parts of the economy that plastics is another one, where we use petroleum in the production of plastics. There's not an easy renewable-based substitute. So we still need to do some work on bio-based substitutes for petroleum products that are in our everyday life, from the plastics that we use to the makeups and the creams that we have. Those are going to be things that really we need some breakthroughs on. I'm not so worried about the electric sector. I think we've got a pretty clear pathway to getting there. And one of the reasons why I'm over here on the operations side of it, not doing research anymore, is because I want to start making it happen. I think the real challenges are going to be, we talked about it earlier, the long haul shipping, long haul trucking, big heavy duty fleets, plastics, steel, other sorts of, really energy intensive portions of the economy where we use natural gas because it's really good, right? Carbon footprint aside, it's a really good high heat controllable fuel. We got to come up with something that's going to provide similar functionality. Otherwise, folks will never adopt it.
And along those lines, I would recommend to everybody this month's National Geographic, which is dedicated to multiple articles on the promise and challenges of electrifying buildings, transportation, and aviation. Excellent summary of that. Next question, at CREA, and for those not familiar, that's the Colorado Rural Electric Association, just held a tech innovations conference. At CREA, I asked, quote, do we expect a grid or portion of the grid to be autonomous within 5 years? And you asked the panel, what do you think?
I asked the panel that question That's right. And I don't think any of them took my bait. I'd like to say that some portion of the Holy Cross grid will be autonomous within 5 years. I think my engineering team, if they were in the office down the hall, they'd be screaming right now. But I'd like to see us give it a go. Basalt Vista was honestly pretty close to that. The controllers on each of the devices orchestrated amongst one another. We put them into preset modes. So it's not full self-driving. It was sort of like driver assist for those of you that are Tesla fans, right? You still had to keep your hands on the wheel, but you didn't have to do a whole lot of work to stay going straight down the road. And that was, 2 years ago. That was 2019. And I think in combination with the Camu platform that we're developing for managing the grid as a whole, the building blocks are there. And I think the challenge will be in gaining enough confidence in them as users so that we feel comfortable letting the autonomous go and monitoring it, right? The different degrees of autonomy. Being, a passenger in an autonomous vehicle is very different than driving in a driver assist mode. And I think if it's driver assist, then yeah, we're absolutely going to be there. If it's full autonomous, we might push in 5 years before we get there, but I still feel pretty optimistic the way that things have been evolving.
Okay, last question as we are running out of time here. In your area of the woodland urban boundary, are you really trying to push rooftop solar? And I'm not sure if that's referring to shading issues.
My guess is with the reference to what we call the WUI, the wildland urban interface, that's usually used in a fire mitigation context.
Right.
So I'm going to assume that's what the intent of the question is here: is why are we pushing rooftop solar in the fire boundary? And the reason is this: because if we can push more self-generation at the point of consumption, then we don't need to build large transmission lines through wooded areas that are the primary source of wildfire risk. In places, particularly like California, where they've not been well maintained or kept up over the last 100 years or more. Here in Holy Cross, we do have a number of overhead transmission lines that run through wildfire risk areas. We have one particular project that we're looking at that's an overhead line where the community has expressed some concern about getting that undergrounded for protection against, among other things, visual impacts as well as wildfire. Obviously, if we were doing more generation of our energy locally, we wouldn't need to have those lines to connect to the outside world and bring in that power from the grid. That being said, I've seen very few, which is to say none, PV fires in our service territory since the time that I've been here, and it's been 4 years, and we've put, like I said, 2,000 of them on rooftops all over our area. And I think that when one is looking at wildfire risk, one ought to think of the comparative risks associated with something like rooftop solar versus transmission versus lightning versus all of the other mechanisms that start wildfires in our forests, which are unfortunately increasingly crispier and drier as each season goes by.
Well, Bryan, thank you very much for spending an evening with us and answering all of these questions. As I said earlier, the vision and expertise that you have brought to Holy Cross Energy is really an inspiration, I think, to all of the rural electric cooperatives in Colorado. And so I thank you very much for this impressive and informative briefing tonight. And thank you to all of the participants for the great questions that you asked. This briefing or this lecture will be up on the CRES YouTube channel. And Bryan has also offered, if anybody wants a copy of the slides, you can email me. In fact, what I'll do is, before we sign off here, I'll put my email address in the chat. Email me and I can send you a copy of the slides. Thank you very much, Bryan. I really appreciate it tonight.
Thank you, Jim, and thanks to all the listeners. Appreciate you being here.